The moment she laid that paper on the table, my insides twisted into a knot. It wasn't just a fake will, it was the final thrust into my heart, the heart of a widowed mother who had already collapsed at her son's grave. My hands trembled as I stared at the document, at the forged signature that mocked everything my boy had stood for. Would I bow my head and accept this betrayal, or would I fight back? The answer came as clearly as the rage burning through my grief. She had chosen the wrong woman to cross. My name is Helen Winters, and at 65, I never imagined I'd be telling this story. The small Midwestern town where I've lived for 40 years has always been the kind of place where everyone knows your business before you do, where secrets float through the air like dandelion seeds. But what happened after my son's funeral? That was something even the nosiest neighbors couldn't have predicted. I spent 37 years working for the Federal Health Oversight Agency, a government office tucked away in a bland building downtown where we processed medical compliance reports and health regulations. It was steady work, methodical and predictable, the kind of job that let me raise my son Daniel as a single mother after his father left us when he was 3. Those decades of reviewing documents, catching discrepancies, and spotting forged signatures. I never thought those skills would serve me in my own living room, defending my family's legacy. The morning sun filters through my kitchen window as I write this, casting long shadows across the oak table where Daniel used to do his homework. This same table where, just 3 weeks ago, my former daughter-in-law Audrey Miller placed a document that would change everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Daniel died on a Tuesday. A semi-truck ran a red light at the intersection of Main and Riverside at 2:45 p.m., and my world collapsed. The driver said he didn't see Daniel's sedan until it was too late. They tell me he died instantly, that he didn't suffer, as if that's supposed to bring comfort to a mother who outlived her only child. The funeral was held at St. Margaret's, the old stone church where Daniel was baptized, confirmed, and married. Half the town showed up, former classmates, co-workers from the engineering firm where he worked, neighbors who remembered him riding his bike up and down Maple Street, everyone except Audrey, his ex-wife who disappeared from our lives 3 years earlier after their divorce. I should have known something was wrong when she appeared at the reception afterward, dressed in a black designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. She'd always had expensive tastes. Even when she and Daniel were struggling to make ends meet, she carried herself differently now, confident, calculating, like a chess player who'd already planned 10 moves ahead. My grandson Marcus, 5 years old with Daniel's same sandy hair and earnest brown eyes, had been living with me since the divorce. Audrey had signed away her parental rights without a second glance, more interested in her new life in Chicago than in raising a child. Daniel and I never spoke ill of her in front of Marcus, but children notice when someone who should love them simply doesn't. That day, as I moved through the reception in a fog of grief, accepting condolences and casseroles, Audrey waited. She sipped her coffee, made small talk with people who barely remembered her, and watched me with the patience of a hunter. I see that now. Looking back, at the time, I was too destroyed to notice anything beyond the next breath, the next thank you, the next minute without my son. It wasn't until everyone had left, when I was sitting in my living room surrounded by sympathy cards and wilting flowers, that she made her move. Marcus was upstairs, exhausted from a day he couldn't fully understand. The doorbell rang at 7:15 p.m., and there she stood, holding a manila envelope like it was a weapon. "We need to talk, Helen," she said, inviting herself in with the same presumption she'd always had. The years hadn't softened her sharp features or warmed her cold blue eyes. If anything, she'd become more polished, more dangerous. I watched Audrey settle into Daniel's favorite armchair, the worn leather recliner where he used to read bedtime stories to Marcus. The audacity of it made my chest tighten, but I was too drained to protest. She crossed her legs, smoothed her skirt, and opened the manila envelope with practiced precision. "First, let me say how sorry I am about Daniel. she began, her voice carrying all the warmth of a January wind. "It must be devastating for you." The words hung in the air like smoke. 3 years of silence. 3 years of missed birthdays and abandoned Christmas mornings. And now she wanted to play the grieving ex-wife. I said nothing, just waited. My years at FHOA had taught me the value of silence, how it could make people reveal more than they intended. "I know this is difficult timing," she continued, pulling out a document, "but there are matters we need to discuss. Legal matters." That's when she said it, the words that sent ice through my veins. "Marcus is Daniel's son, as you know, and according to this will, Daniel left everything to both of us, to Marcus and to me as his mother." She slid the paper across the coffee table between us. My hands remained folded in my lap. I didn't need to touch it to know something was wrong. Daniel had been meticulous about his affairs, especially after the divorce. We'd sat in Attorney Morrison's office just 6 months ago, updating everything. Marcus was the sole beneficiary, with me as guardian and trustee until his 18th birthday. Daniel had been crystal clear about that. "I don't understand," I said finally, my voice steady despite the storm building inside me. "Daniel's will is filed with Morrison and Associates. I have a copy in my safe." Audrey's smile was sharp as glass. "That was the old will. This one is dated 2 weeks before his death. He must have realized it wasn't fair to cut me out completely. After all, I am Marcus's mother." The word mother from her lips was like acid on an open wound. This was the woman who hadn't called Marcus on his birthday, who'd moved away without a forwarding address, who'd signed papers relinquishing her rights with the same casual indifference most people reserve for signing a restaurant receipt. I forced myself to look at the document. The letterhead was wrong. Some law firm I'd never heard of. Brennan and Associates from Springfield. Daniel had never mentioned changing lawyers. The formatting was different from the legal documents I'd spent decades reviewing. But it was the signature that made my breath catch. It looked like Daniel's, but something was off. The way the D curved, the angle of the crossed T, details only a mother would notice. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "Daniel sent it to me," she said smoothly. "He wanted to make sure I had a copy. You know how thoughtful he was." Thoughtful, as if she knew anything about my son's character anymore. Daniel, who'd cried in my kitchen the night she left, who'd sworn he'd never let her hurt Marcus again. Daniel, who'd called me every Sunday at 6 p.m. without fail, who'd made me promise to always protect his son if anything happened to him. "I'll need to verify this with his attorney," I said, still maintaining that professional calm I'd perfected over decades of government work. "Of course," Audrey replied, standing up, "but I wanted you to know I'll be petitioning for custody of Marcus. It's what Daniel would have wanted. His son with his mother. The will makes his intentions clear. I'll have my lawyer contact you." She left the document on the table, letting herself out with the confidence of someone who believed she'd already won. I sat there in the gathering darkness, listening to her heels click down my front walk, the sound fading like a countdown to war. Upstairs, I could hear Marcus stirring, probably awakened by the voices. In a few minutes, I'd need to go comfort him, promise him everything would be okay. But first, I picked up the paper with steady hands, the same hands that had caught thousands of forgeries over the years, and held it to the lamplight. The rage that had been simmering since she'd walked in crystallized into something harder, sharper. She'd made 2 mistakes. First, she'd underestimated me, thinking grief would make me weak. Second, she'd forgotten who I was before I became a grieving mother, a woman who'd spent nearly 4 decades spotting lies in black and white. The paper trembled in my hands, though not from weakness. It was rage, pure and crystalline, fighting against the suffocating weight of grief. How dare she? How dare she walk into my home, sit in my son's chair, and present this fabrication while his body was barely cold in the ground? I set the document down and climbed the stairs to check on Marcus. He was sitting up in bed, his dinosaur pajamas twisted from sleep, clutching the stuffed elephant Daniel had given him last Christmas. "Grandma, who was that?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. Just someone who came to talk about grown-up things, I said, smoothing his hair. Nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart. Was it about Daddy? The innocence in his voice nearly broke me, in a way, but everything's going to be fine, I promise. After he'd fallen back asleep, I returned to my bedroom and opened the safe where I kept our important documents. Daniel's real will was there, exactly where it should be, dated 6 months ago and properly notarized. I spread both documents on my bed, comparing them under the harsh light of my reading lamp. The differences became more apparent with careful examination. The fake will used legal language that sounded impressive, but was slightly off, like a symphony played with one instrument out of tune. Phrases were repeated awkwardly. The witness signatures were illegible scrawls, convenient for someone who didn't want them traced. But it was Daniel's supposed signature that angered me most. Someone had practiced, certainly, they'd gotten close, but they'd failed to capture the way he always lifted his pen slightly between the I and E in his last name, a quirk he'd had since elementary school. They'd missed how he invariably made his capital D with a flourish when he was signing something important, a habit he'd picked up from watching me sign official documents all those years. I sat on my bed, surrounded by evidence of my son's real wishes and this cruel forgery, and let myself remember. Not the Daniel in the hospital, not the police officer at my door at 3:20 p.m. that Tuesday, but my living son, the boy who'd brought me dandelions for Mother's Day, calling them sunshine flowers, the teenager who'd stayed home on prom night when I had the flu, making me soup and watching old movies, the man who'd cried in my arms after Audrey left, not for himself, but for Marcus. "She doesn't love him. Mom," he'd said that night, his voice broken, "how can a mother not love her own child?" I'd had no answer then. I had one now. Some people were simply incapable of love, seeing others only as tools for their own purposes. Audrey had proven that when she'd walked away from a 2-year-old who called for her in his sleep, now she was back. Not for Marcus, but for money. Daniel's life insurance, his savings, the modest investment portfolio we'd built together, it was enough to catch her attention, especially with a forged document to legitimize her claim. The old Helen might have called Attorney Morrison immediately, might have trusted the system to sort out truth from lies, but that Helen had died at 2:45 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. The woman who remained understood that sometimes the system failed, that justice required more than faith in proper procedures. I closed my eyes and saw Daniel's face, not as he'd been at the end, but at Marcus's last birthday party, laughing as his son smeared chocolate cake across his cheeks. He'd pulled me aside that day, suddenly serious. "If anything ever happens to me, Mom, promise me you'll protect him, not just from the world, but from her. She'll come back if she thinks there's something to gain." I'd promised, thinking it was just his anxiety talking. Now I understood it had been prophecy. The grief was still there, an ocean threatening to drown me with each breath, but beneath it, something else was taking shape. Call it maternal instinct, call it righteous fury, call it the accumulated wisdom of 65 years and thousands of reviewed documents. Audrey thought she was dealing with a broken old woman, too shattered by loss to fight back. She had no idea what she'd awakened. I reached for my phone, scrolling through contacts until I found the name I needed. Not Morrison, this required someone different, someone who understood that sometimes the law needed help finding its way to justice. The phone rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Sullivan Investigations." "Tom, it's Helen Winters. I need your help." The betrayal burned deeper each time I looked at Marcus. He'd started having nightmares since the funeral, calling out for his daddy in the small hours of the morning. I'd hold him until he fell back asleep, his small body trembling against mine, and I'd think about Audrey in her designer suit, calculating how much my grandson was worth to her. Tom Sullivan came by the next evening after Marcus was in bed. He was a former state trooper who'd helped FHOA with several fraud investigations over the years. More importantly, He understood that grief and rage could coexist, that a grandmother's fury could be as precise as a surgeon's blade. "Show me everything, Ware," he said, settling at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee. I spread out both wills, pointing out the discrepancies I'd found. Tom studied them with the same intensity I'd seen him bring to complex fraud cases, occasionally making notes in a small leather notebook. "This Brennan and Associates," he said finally, "never heard of them, and I know every law firm in a 100-mile radius." "The witnesses," I added, pointing to the illegible signatures, "conveniently unreadable." Tom nodded. "When did she show up?" 3 days after the funeral, like she'd been waiting for the right moment. Or waiting for something else. Tom mused. "Death certificates take a few days to process. Insurance companies need them. Banks need them. Someone who knew the system would know exactly when to strike." The words hit me like cold water, of course. Audrey had always been calculating, but this level of planning suggested something more. She'd researched, prepared, maybe even had help. "I need you to dig deep, Tom," I said. "Find out where she's been, what she's been doing, and this law firm. I want to know everything about them." "What about your attorney, Morrison?" I shook my head. "Not yet. First, I need ammunition. Then I'll bring in the legal cavalry." Tom studied me over his coffee cup. "You're not the same woman who used to flag irregular Medicare claims." "No," I agreed. "I'm not." After he left, I found myself standing in Daniel's old room. I'd kept it exactly as he'd left it the last time he'd stayed over, helping me fix the garage door. His high school trophies still lined the shelf. Pictures of him with Marcus covered one wall. First steps, first day of preschool, last Christmas. In every photo, Daniel's love for his son radiated like sunlight. I remembered the day Audrey left. Daniel had come over at 11:30 p.m., Marcus asleep in his arms. She'd cleared out while they were at the park, taking her clothes and jewelry but leaving behind her son's toys. His clothes, the rocking chair where she'd never actually rocked him to sleep. She left a note, Daniel had said, his voice hollow. Said motherhood wasn't what she'd expected. Said we'd all be better off. I'd taken Marcus from his arms, feeling the baby's weight, his trust, his need that night. I'd made a promise to my sleeping grandson that he'd never feel abandoned again. Now his mother wanted to use him as a lottery ticket. The rage that had been simmering since Audrey's visit crystallized into something colder, more dangerous. She thought she could waltz back into our lives with a forged document and steal not just money, but my grandson's security, his future, his faith in the people who loved him. My phone buzzed. A text from Tom. "Found something. Brennan and Associates doesn't exist. It's a virtual office. Registered 2 months ago. Checking who paid for it." 2 months ago. Daniel had been alive 2 months ago, complaining about summer allergies and planning Marcus's birthday party. While he was living his life, someone was already preparing to profit from his death. I walked to my window and looked out at the street where Daniel had learned to ride a bike, where he'd waited for the school bus, where he'd taught Marcus to catch fireflies last summer. This was our home, our history, our sanctuary. Audrey had forfeited her place in it the day she chose herself over her son. If she wanted a fight, she'd get one, but it would be on my terms, with my rules, and with the kind of preparation that had made me FHOA's best fraud investigator for 2 decades. I picked up my phone again and started making a list. Bank records to request, social media to investigate, former neighbors to contact. Somewhere in Audrey's past 3 years was the key to her plan, and I would find it. The grandmother she'd dismissed as weak was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd raised a son alone, who'd built a career catching liars, who'd survived the unsurvivable. Audrey had made a fatal error in judgment. She'd threatened my grandson. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of careful planning. By day, I maintained the facade of a grieving grandmother, taking Marcus to school, making his meals, helping with homework, but after his bedtime, I transformed into something else entirely, a hunter gathering evidence, piece by methodical piece. Tom's investigation uncovered a web of deception that would have impressed me if it hadn't enraged me. Audrey had been busy. The virtual law office was just the beginning. She'd been building a social media presence as a devoted mother separated from her child, posting old photos of Marcus she must have saved on her phone, crafting a narrative of forced separation that bore no resemblance to reality. "She's been at this for months," Tom reported during one of our late-night calls. "Created a whole backstory, joined online support groups for mothers fighting custody battles, built a network of sympathy." "While Daniel was alive?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The first post started 3 months ago. She's been planning this. Helen, the fake will, was just the final piece." I contacted attorney Morrison quietly, bringing him into the fold with the same caution I'd once used for sensitive government investigations. He was appalled by the forged will, but not entirely surprised. "I've seen grief bring out the worst in people," he said, examining the document. "But this is calculated cruelty." We decided to let Audrey think she was winning. Let her file her custody petition. Let her present her forged will to the court. Meanwhile, we built our case like architects designing a fortress. Every stone placed with purpose. Every detail verified twice. Tom found the smoking gun in week 3. Audrey had been living with a man named Derek Marsh, a small-time con artist with a record of fraud and forgery. His signature style matched the witness signatures on the fake will. Photos from social media showed them together at a casino in Atlantic City the weekend before Daniel's death, celebrating what they captioned as "our upcoming windfall." The cruelty of it stole my breath. While my son was enjoying his last weekend on Earth, taking Marcus to the zoo and sending me pictures of them by the elephant exhibit, his ex-wife was literally celebrating his upcoming death. But the worst discovery came from Daniel's phone records. Morrison had helped me access them as part of the estate documentation. There, buried in the data, was evidence that Audrey had been calling Daniel repeatedly in his final weeks, not to reconcile, not to ask about Marcus, but to fish for information about his assets, his insurance policies, his will. "She knew," I told Tom, my voice steady despite the nausea rolling through me. "She knew he had that new life insurance policy through work. He must have mentioned it during one of her calls." The picture was becoming clear. Audrey and her boyfriend had targeted Daniel like predators stalking prey. When the accident happened, a horrible, random tragedy, they saw opportunity where everyone else saw devastation. I began reaching out to others who'd known Audrey during her marriage to Daniel. The stories they shared painted a consistent picture. The daycare worker who remembered Audrey dropping Marcus off at 6 a.m. and picking him up at closing time, annoyed when they called about his fever. The neighbor who'd seen her loading her car in the middle of the day while Daniel was at work, taking everything valuable and leaving behind her son's favorite teddy bear. The friend who'd tried to organize a play date only to be told that Audrey didn't do the mommy thing. Each conversation added another brick to the wall I was building around Marcus. Another piece of evidence that the woman claiming maternal rights had abandoned them long ago. Morrison suggested we file a preemptive motion, but I had a different idea. Audrey wanted a confrontation. She expected tears, pleas, perhaps an attempt at negotiation. Instead, I would give her what every con artist feared most: an audience for her deception and witnesses to her downfall. "I want a family meeting," I told Morrison. "Here, in my home. Let her present her case to everyone who matters. Daniel's friends, our family, anyone she's trying to convince of her lies. Make it seem like I'm ready to negotiate." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "That's risky, Helen." "No," I corrected. "That's justice. She ambushed me in my grief. Now it's my turn." I sent the invitation through Morrison's office, making it seem like a reluctant attempt at mediation. Audrey accepted immediately, probably thinking she'd won. She had no idea she was walking into a carefully laid trap, designed by a woman who'd spent 40 years spotting frauds and a lifetime protecting her family. The meeting was set for the following Saturday at 2 p.m. I had 1 week to finish preparing. 1 week to ensure that Audrey Miller would never threaten my grandson again. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air Daniel had loved. I dressed carefully, not in the black of mourning, but in the navy suit I'd worn to important meetings at FHOA, the one that made me feel armored. Marcus was at my sister's house for the day, safely removed from what was about to unfold. By 1:30 p.m., my living room had been transformed into a tribunal. Daniel's closest friends were there, Jim from the engineering firm, Sarah, who'd known him since college, Pastor Williams from St. Margaret's. My brother Robert had driven in from Indianapolis, his face set in the same grim lines I remembered from Daniel's funeral. Morrison sat near the window with his briefcase, while Tom Sullivan positioned himself by the door, ostensibly just another family friend. The stage was set, the witnesses assembled. All that remained was for the accused to present herself. Audrey arrived at precisely 2 p.m., Derek Marsh at her side. She'd miscalculated bringing him. It showed her hand too clearly. He was younger than her, flashy in a cheap suit and too much cologne, his eyes doing a quick inventory of my home like an appraiser. "Thank you for agreeing to this. Helen," Audrey said, settling into the same chair she'd occupied weeks earlier. Her confidence hadn't dimmed. If anything, she seemed more certain of victory. "I think mediation is so much better than a prolonged court battle, don't you? Especially for Marcus's sake." The invocation of my grandson's name from her lips made several people shift uncomfortably. Sarah, who'd been there the day Audrey left, actually made a small sound of disgust. "Present your case," I said simply. Audrey produced the forged will with a flourish, laying it on the coffee table like a winning poker hand. As I explained before, Daniel realized it wasn't fair to cut me out entirely. This will ensure Marcus is provided for while recognizing my rights as his mother. "When exactly did Daniel give you this?" Morrison asked, his tone professionally neutral. "He mailed it to me 2 weeks before the accident," Audrey replied smoothly. "He said he wanted to make things right." Jim leaned forward. "That's interesting, because 2 weeks before he died, Daniel and I were in Detroit for an engineering conference. I have the hotel receipts, the conference schedule. He couldn't have mailed anything from there to Chicago." Audrey's smile flickered. "He must have sent it before he left." "From the office," Jim continued, "because I also have the mail log from that week. We were rushing to finish the Henderson project. Every piece of outgoing mail is recorded." Derek Marsh shifted uneasily, but Audrey pressed on. "He could have mailed it from anywhere." "That's when I played my first card, Tom." Tom Sullivan stepped forward, producing a folder. "I've run a forensic analysis on the document. The paper is from a batch manufactured 6 weeks ago, 2 weeks after Daniel's death. Hard to mail something on paper that didn't exist yet." The room went silent. Audrey's face had gone pale, but she rallied. There must be some mistake." "Like the mistake with Brennan and Associates?" I asked. "The law firm that doesn't exist except as a virtual office you paid for with Derek's credit card?" Derek started to stand, but Tom's presence kept him in place. "Or the mistake," I continued, "of posting on social media about your upcoming windfall the weekend before my son died?" Morrison opened his briefcase, pulling out printed screenshots. "Would you like to explain this post, Miss Miller, the one where Mr. Marsh comments, 'Just a little longer, babe,' with a money bag emoji?" Pastor Williams spoke up, his usually gentle voice hard with disapproval. "Daniel came to me 3 months ago, concerned about calls he was getting from you. He said you were asking strange questions about his insurance, his savings. He was worried you were in some kind of trouble." "I was his wife," Audrey snapped, her composure cracking. "I had a right to know." "Ex-wife," Sarah corrected coldly. "Ex-wife who abandoned a 2-year-old. I was there. Audrey, I watched Daniel cry himself sick while Marcus asked where Mommy went. You have no rights here." Robert stood up, his military bearing evident. "Daniel was my nephew. I taught him to ride a bike, stood as his best man, held him when his father died. If you think we're going to let you waltz in here with fake documents and stolen sympathy to take his son, you're badly mistaken." The walls were closing in. Audrey looked around the room, seeing not the easy marks she'd expected, but a united front of people who'd loved Daniel and who saw through her performance. "The real will is filed with the court," Morrison announced. "Marcus is the sole beneficiary, with his grandmother as guardian. Any claim you make will be met with charges of fraud, forgery, and attempted theft by deception." The silence in the room was deafening. Audrey's carefully constructed facade crumbled before our eyes, her face cycling through disbelief, rage, and finally, desperate calculation. Derek Marsh had gone gray, his cheap confidence evaporating as he realized the depth of their exposure. "You can't prove anything," Audrey said, but her voice had lost its smooth certainty. "That will is legitimate. Daniel wanted—" "Stop." My voice cut through her protests like a blade. I stood slowly, feeling every eye in the room on me. "Just stop." I walked to the coffee table and picked up the forged will. The paper felt contaminated in my hands, poisoned by her greed and cruelty. "Do you know what Daniel wanted, Audrey? He wanted to be a father. He wanted to watch Marcus grow up, teach him to throw a baseball, help him with algebra, walk him down the aisle someday." My voice grew stronger with each word. He wanted to give his son everything he never had: stability, unconditional love, a parent who stayed, and when you left, when you abandoned them both without a backward glance. He picked up those pieces and built something beautiful, a life, a future, a family. I held the forged will up to the light, letting everyone see it clearly. This isn't just fraud, it's desecration. You're spitting on his grave, using his death as a lottery ticket, trying to steal from the child you threw away. "I'm his mother," Audrey shrieked, abandoning all pretense. "I have rights." "You had rights," Robert interjected. "You signed them away. Sarah has the documents you signed, notarized and witnessed. Would you like her to read them aloud, the part where you state you want no further contact with your minor child?" Sarah pulled out her phone. "I have photos of the documents right here, and the text messages you sent Daniel afterward, telling him you were free at last and heading to Vegas to celebrate." Tom Sullivan stepped forward again. "Speaking of Vegas, Miss Miller, would you like to discuss your activities there? The casino debts, the markers you and Mr. Marsh have been running from? Is that what this is really about, needing money to pay off the wrong people?" Derek Marsh finally spoke, his voice high with panic. "We don't have to listen to this. Come on, Audrey, let's go." But Audrey wasn't finished, her face contorted with rage. She turned on me. "You poisoned him against me. You always hated me, always thought I wasn't good enough for your precious son." "No," I said quietly. "I welcomed you into our family. I held your hand during labor, decorated your hospital room, helped you through those first sleepless nights with Marcus. I loved you because Daniel loved you, but you threw it all away, not because of me, but because being a mother was inconvenient for your lifestyle." Morrison cleared his throat. "Miss Miller, Mr. Marsh, I strongly suggest you leave now. Any further contact with Mrs. Winters or Marcus will result in immediate legal action. The forged will has been documented and will be turned over to the authorities. If you're smart, you'll disappear as quickly as you appeared." "This isn't over," Audrey hissed, but the fight had gone out of her. She knew she'd lost. "Yes," I said firmly, "it is." I walked to the fireplace, where Daniel's photo sat on the mantel, him and Marcus at the beach last summer, both grinning at the camera. Without ceremony, I held the forged will to the lit candle I'd placed there earlier. The paper caught instantly, flames consuming the lies written on it. "No!" Audrey lunged forward, but Tom and Robert blocked her path. We all watched as the forgery turned to ash, floating up the chimney like the empty promises it contained. "Get out of my house," I said, not looking at her. "Get out and never come back. If I see you near Marcus, if you try to contact him, if you so much as drive down our street, I'll have you arrested for fraud, harassment, and child endangerment. Tom has enough evidence to put you both away for years." Derek was already at the door, pulling Audrey with him. She cast one last venomous look around the room, seeing nothing but contempt reflected back at her. Then they were gone, the door closing behind them with a finality that echoed through the house. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Jim started to clap, slowly at first, then others joined in. Not celebration, but acknowledgement of a battle won, justice served, a child protected. I sank into my chair, suddenly exhausted. Morrison squeezed my shoulder. "You did it, Helen. Daniel would be proud." "He'd be alive," I whispered, the grief rushing back now that the anger had served its purpose. "That's what he should be." But as my family and friends gathered around me, offering comfort and support, I knew I'd kept my promise. Marcus was safe, his future was secure, and somewhere, somehow, I felt Daniel's presence, not in forged documents or false claims, but in the love that filled this room, the community that had risen to protect his son. The war was over. Audrey Miller had gambled on my weakness and lost everything. Tomorrow, I would grieve again, would face the empty chair at our table and the silence where Daniel's laughter should be. But tonight, I had won the only victory that mattered. I had protected my grandson from the woman who'd birthed him but never learned to love him, and in doing so, I'd honored my son's memory in the only way that truly mattered, by being the guardian his child needed, the fortress standing between innocence and greed. The house emptied slowly, friends and family offering final words of support before disappearing into the October afternoon. Tom Sullivan was the last to leave, pausing at the door with a knowing look. "She won't be back," he said quietly. "Derek Marsh has warrants in 3 states. They'll run far and fast." I nodded, too drained to speak. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with the battle and everything to do with the war I'd never finish fighting, the one against Daniel's absence. After everyone left, I stood in my too quiet living room, looking at the ashes in the fireplace. The forged will was gone, but its memory lingered like smoke. How many other Audreys were out there, waiting to prey on grief, to twist love into leverage? At 4:30 p.m., my sister brought Marcus home. He bounded through the door with the resilience only children possess, chattering about the movie they'd watched and the popcorn that had too much butter. I gathered him into my arms, breathing in his little boy scent of graham crackers and playground dust. "Grandma, why are you squeezing so tight?" "Whoa," he giggled. "Because I love you to the moon and back," I said, using Daniel's phrase. Marcus smiled, satisfied with this explanation, and wriggled free to find his toy dinosaurs. That evening, as I tucked him into bed, Marcus asked the question I'd been dreading. "Grandma, do I have a mommy?" I sat on the edge of his bed, choosing my words carefully. "You did, sweetheart, but sometimes people aren't ready to be mommies or daddies. It doesn't mean anything is wrong with you. It means they needed to go figure things out." "Like Daddy went to heaven?" "No, baby, not like that. Daddy didn't want to leave us. He loved you more than all the stars in the sky." Marcus considered this with 5-year-old solemnity. "But you're staying, right?" "Forever and always," I promised, kissing his forehead. "Nothing could make me leave you." As he drifted off to sleep, I remained there, watching him breathe. This little boy who looked so much like Daniel at that age, who had his father's kind heart and curious mind. Audrey had seen a payday, but she'd missed the real treasure, this precious child who sang to his stuffed animals and left dandelions on my pillow because they were sunshine flowers like his daddy taught him. I made my way to Daniel's room one last time. Tomorrow, I'd start the painful process of packing some things away, not erasing him, but making space for the future Marcus would need. But tonight, I sat in his desk chair and let myself remember. My son hadn't been perfect. He'd been human, sometimes impatient, occasionally stubborn, always apologetic when he realized he'd been short with someone. But he'd been good in the way that mattered, kind in the way that counted. He'd loved fiercely and forgiven freely, except when it came to protecting Marcus. Then he'd been steel. "I did it," I whispered to his photograph. "I protected him, just like I promised." The window was open. letting in the sounds of our neighborhood settling into evening, children calling to each other, doors closing, families gathering for dinner, life continuing its ancient rhythm, indifferent to individual grief but somehow comforting in its constancy. I thought about Audrey, probably halfway to another state by now, running from debts and warrants and the consequences of her choices. Part of me pitied her. What empty life led someone to see their own child as nothing more than a financial opportunity? But mostly, I felt relief. She was gone. The threat had passed. Marcus was safe. Standing to leave, I noticed something I'd missed before. Tucked into Daniel's desk calendar, a note in his handwriting. Tell Mom I love her. Tell Marcus he's my superhero. Every day. He'd written reminders to express love as if he somehow knew time was shorter than any of us imagined. I held the note to my chest, feeling its message seep into my broken heart. This was Daniel's true legacy, not money or property, but love deliberately spoken, intentionally shared. I walked to my bedroom window and looked out at the maple tree Daniel had helped me plant when he was 10. It was massive now, its leaves brilliant orange in the fading light, strong roots, steady growth, shelter for all who needed it, just like the family we'd built, the family that had stood together today against those who would harm us. The battle was over. Justice had prevailed, but more than that, love had won, the quiet, steady love of a grandmother for her grandson, the eternal love of a mother for her son, the protective love of a community for its own. I closed my eyes and made a new promise, not just to protect Marcus, but to help him grow into the man his father would have been proud of, to tell him stories of Daniel's kindness, his laughter, his dreams, to make sure he knew that blood might make you related, but love made you family. And Audrey? She'd fade into nothing, a cautionary tale whispered at kitchen tables about what happens when greed tries to masquerade as grief, while we, Marcus and I, would continue forward, held up by Daniel's love, surrounded by those who truly cared, building a future on the foundation of all the good that came before. The stars were coming out, first one, then dozens, then countless lights in the darkness. Daniel had loved astronomy, always pointing out constellations to Marcus. Tonight, I found Orion, the hunter, the protector, the guardian. Thank you, I whispered to the sky, to my son, to whatever forces had given me the strength to fight when I'd wanted only to crumble. Tomorrow would come with its challenges, but tonight, my grandson slept safely in his bed, his inheritance secure, his future protected. And in the end, that was all that mattered. That was everything. That was enough. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're hearing this. Please share in the comments below so we can connect across the miles. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing your own thoughts and experiences. Your stories matter too, and I'd be honored to hear them.